I thank you all very much for the happy presence you have given me this evening also. And I thank the hosts who are very kind and who have provided us with special things to demonstrate. I am a bit new to some of these implements, and sometimes I may be going wrong in using them. I hope you will put up with certain inequalities which I may commit in these But anyhow, I'll try to behave a bit disciplined with these instruments also. I am expected to speak something about Ayurveda this evening. By Ayurveda, generally people mean some herbs and some medicines used as some specifics. But I say every system of medicine has its own scientific background, rather its own philosophy in the language of Samuel Hahnemann. And Ayurveda, being an age-old science, tried, verified and found correct through thousands of years. It has its own philosophy and the scientific background and its own practical steps and modus operandi. It has a characteristic system of its own about diagnosis of diseases, about the origin of diseases and cure of diseases. But all this put together is considered secondary by the authors of the science. The primary aspect and more important aspect being something about health and span. And if you go through the original scientific texts of Ayurveda, you will be a bit disappointed on the outset to see that there is very little about diseases, diagnosis and specifics. And there is much about the definition of the span of life and the equilibrium that exists in the name of span of life, and the practical methods to maintain this equilibrium so that health is maintained without a mention of disease and its origin. Your relationship with your body, mind and senses, your duties towards your physical vehicle which serves you night and day, and in fact the right relationship of yourself with your body, and some important items of your daily routine which make you keep your health sound, and your duties at the times of what we call the junctions of the year, or the seasonal junctions of the year, which we call the season changes, which are more prominent in the tropical areas than here, because the health is apt to be affected more in the seasonal changes in the tropical countries than in the cold countries. And the precautions that are expected to be taken by you when the season changes from winter to summer, from summer to rainy season, and again from rainy season to winter. Because there are three distinct seasons in the tropics. Now, I make an humble beginning to go down a few steps into what I can call the ocean of the Ayurvedic philosophy. At best, I can give you only very rough and faint outlines in one lecture. But at the same time, I will be able to give you a full atlas of the scope of the science. Now we will start with the name Ayurveda, why it is used. It is two different words, not one. One is Ayur and the other is Veda. The first word means in Sanskrit the span or span of life. And Veda means wisdom, as you have seen in our classes. So to say, the compound title Ayurveda indicates the wisdom of the human span, or more simply, the science of the span of man. In fact, that is the scope of the subject and not at all the diseases and their cure. But however, there is the description of diseases and the methods of cure also in the system. I only want to point out that the primary function and the province of the science is not disease and its cure. And then there is the definition of span according to Ayurveda. It is defined as the coexistence of matter and pulsation. Now, those who have studied the books of the Tibetan master among you might be knowing what pulsation is. The ancient most postulate that space pulsates gives us a clue to the formation of the galaxies of stars and the externalization of the various stars in the form of solar systems. And each solar system inherits the same property of pulsation. In its course of externalization, it produces the planetary centers around itself, which at first work as the whirlpools of forces, each of which will materialize into planetary globes through a vast sweep of ages and years. Once again, the atoms of each planetary globe inherit the same property of pulsation and form its own nucleus of activity. And the result is each atom evolves into an ego. The Theosophical science calls the permanent atom. And it begins its own journey of evolution until it has the first nuclear awakening to finish its career as the various atoms of various materials on this planet. Then there is the second awakening called the biological awakening. And then there is the third awakening called the plant awakening, which gives the dawn of sensations. Sensations and feelings not differentiated. And then there is the next awakening called the animal awakening, with sensations and feelings quite differentiated, and the apparatus separated in the name of the brain and the cerebrospinal nervous system. And there is the next awakening called the awakening of the human consciousness, which gives the origin of the human being on this planet. In all these stages, the permanent atom inherits the phenomenon of pulsation. So too we inherit in the form of our respiration. So to say, from the moment of birth, we have an instinct to respire, which makes us inaugurate our breathing. And this respiration and the principle that is in the background is meant by the term pulsation by the scientists of the Ayurveda. When some matter is arranged in the form of a body, first by gathering from the inorganic and the organic kingdoms of this earth, and then when that unit matter begins to coexist with the property of pulsation, that is called the beginning of the span of a living being. And as long as the pulsation and that unit matter coexist, it is called the span of that particular living being. That's why it is defined that span is the coexistence of matter and pulsation. And next, there is the definition of pulsation given. Pulsation is externalization of consciousness as respiration. Of course, there is also the definition of consciousness and other things which are very complicated. Okay. But it is enough if I say that consciousness is defined as the aggregate activity of one unit of matter. When the unit is composed, the nuclear and the biological activity of the unit, which includes millions of atoms, produces a composite expression of activity, which we understand as consciousness. So what we call consciousness is only an awakening that exists as long as the congregation of the material cells exist. When the congregation is redistributed into nature in the name of what we call death, then the composite consciousness recedes into the unit consciousness of the various units. The result is unconsciousness in the unit. That is how death is defined in Ayurveda. So the pulsation is defined as externalization of consciousness. And the externalization manifests in the form of respiration. You know that respiration is twofold. One is called the centripetal pulsation and the other the centrifugal pulsation. These two pulsations produce the instinct to respire. And our respiration is only a result of these pulsations. So to say, respiration depends upon certain conditions that exist previously. And then it is stated that we breathe because we live. And It is not true that we live because we breathe. That is one strange statement made in the Ayurvedic science. Respiration is rather the result of living, and living is not the result of respiration. Because when the lungs stop at the time of death, you can't make the being live by making the lungs respire mechanically. That's the reason why they say that living is the cause of respiration. And as long as the individual lives, it permits the nerves to make the muscles of the lungs respire. The process of respiration every moment externalizes consciousness. Surface layers in many ways, mainly 7 layers of surface of consciousness, the composite of which we call mind. So on the background of the mind, there is the externalization of the story of what we call our span. This is in short about the introduction of the biological phenomenon which we call life. And there is the next statement that the physical body is not an entity in itself, but it is the resultant of millions of forces at work. It is the result of the equilibrium of all the forces, like the tent of a circus. There is no item like a tent existing. There is only the cloth and the sticks and the pulleys and the strings. Yes, and the strings. Yes. And when these things are arranged in a particular fashion, there is the existence of what we call the tent. So you can very easily understand that the tent is not an item by itself, but it is only the result of the equilibrium of the components. Similarly, our physical body is only the resultant of the equilibrium of the components. The components are what we call matter, force and mind. And matter is also defined as the arrangement of force units in various designs. And it is the mind that directs the force units to arrange themselves into various designs, like flower designs in nature. See how nature is capable of producing flowers in various designs. See how it produces the wings of the butterflies in various designs. So, nature is saturated with shape consciousness, color consciousness and number consciousness. These consciousnesses are called the leaders of the group of devas. And the groups work out the designs of forces. Each design begins to function as an atom. And these atoms are juxtaposed into secondary and tertiary designs. And these are what are called the various substances on the material plane. If we say sulfur, iron, calcium and phosphorus, they are understood as various substances or various materials. Each substance differs from the other in the structure of the primary, secondary and tertiary designs, but not the basic substance that makes these things. Basic substance is what we call force. So, as Albert Einstein puts forth, force is matter and matter is force in two different states. Just like the ice block and the water on the surface of which the ice block is floating. The substance being the same, the states of substance are many. And this property imparts the production of various tissues in the body. Matter is said to exist in two planes of existence. The one is the grosser plane and the other is the circular plane. On the circular plane, it produces a body, a composite design of the total designs, which we call the shape of the body. And there exists a center of shape consciousness in the circular body, which governs the shape of the whole body. And first, the body is produced with the circular matter. This is what we call the body of prana, and in the theosophical science we call it the etheric body. In the homeopathic science we call it the vital body, and also called the dynamic body, made up of intelligent force. That is, a force which carries with it the intelligence also, that can manipulate the production of the required tissues, and that manipulates the consistency of the biochemistry of the tissues to be produced. As a result, we have the formula of the bones almost always the same, and the chemical formula of the muscle substance is different from the bone substance, always being consistent as far as it is muscle matter. So we have the material of the nervous system, the bony system, the muscular system, and the vascular system, and the cutaneous system, the formation of the various layers of membranes, and the tissue that makes the nails and the teeth and the harder substances. Each of these items has its own formula of biochemistry, which is consistent to itself, and it presupposes an intelligence working through the force. And that is why the vital body is also called the intelligent matter working. That which we call the pranamaya sharira in Sanskrit, or the body of prana, which we call the etheric body in the theosophical science. It is made up of the solar substance which comes down through the sun's rays to the earth, and it produces its own designs to make the physical body, that is the grosser material body, possible. And it presides over the functions of assimilation of food, water, and air and the various gases, so that it uses the chemicals of these substances to be arranged into the tissues of the physical body. So, an intelligent energy or force is proposed in Ayurveda, which forms the etheric body and which is governed by what we call the mental body, and which is inhabited by what we call the buddhic body. In fact, the buddhi is the indweller of the body, whereas the mind and the etheric body and the physical body are only vehicles. This is only for medical purposes. Because what we call the indweller or buddhi is an egg of consciousness, self-luminous and self-conscious. It contains two layers and the inhabitant content. Just as the egg we know has two layers and the chicken inside, the egg of our buddhic body also contains the two layers and the indweller. The outermost layer is called buddhi. The next layer is what we call soul, and the indweller is what we call the spirit, which we call the I am in us, which means pure space within this body, which is in no way different from the space outside it. This is the construction and the plan of the body as is given by the Ayurvedic seers. And the physical body is said to be produced by the vital body continuously. And this process is going on every split second as long as the span continues. And as this process is going on, the vital body or the etheric body is always in dynamic state, producing the fabric of the physical body only as the resultant. Just as the movement of water produces waves, the activity of the vital body produces the physical tissues. That's why the physical tissues are compared with waves and sometimes water bubbles. This is by way of introduction of the structure and the function of the human constitution. Some of us are familiar with what we call the vital body since the advent of the master of wisdom, whom we call Samuel Hahnemann. Until then, it was believed that the physical body was also an independent entity and that health or disease exists to the physical body. And also it was falsely believed that the physical body can be cured and restored to health. Of course, there are people who believe in that theory still even today. For example, the present medical science teaches that particular theory of ignorance. It teaches us that the byproducts of the body when tested give us the diagnosis of the disease. And it gives us the many branches of science of what we call the clinical tests. And we go through the readings of the clinical test and give a diagnosis of the disease, believing that the physical body is having disease. But according to homeopathy and Ayurveda and any other medicinal system except allopathy, the physical body is not an entity in itself at all. It is only a resultant and an ultimate. When it is not an entity at all, how can it have health or disease independently? And when something is going wrong somewhere, you will find only the effects on the physical body and not at all the causes. According to Ayurveda also, what we call diseases of the physical parts are only the results of the real disease. And whenever we try to treat the physical body independently with antibiotics and other systems, no healing takes place. At best, it amounts to a certain amount of scavenging the impurities on the physical level. Suppose I make a mistake on the paper here, and if someone looks at the mistake on the wall